There's a moment in every relationship where the energy begins to shift. One person pulls back, not to punish, not to play games, but to reclaim emotional clarity. That silence isn't empty space, it's a force that speaks louder than any words ever could. When you stop texting and calling a man, you're not disappearing, you're creating space. And space is where truth reveals itself. In that quiet, a man is forced to feel what your constant presence once protected him from: reflection, uncertainty, even vulnerability. Most women assume that silence means loss. They fear he'll forget, move on, or stop caring. But in reality, something powerful happens. That silence becomes a mirror. He begins to question. He starts to notice the void your absence creates. And suddenly, the things he took for granted rise to the surface. Men often respond to silence in ways that surprise even them. At first, they might enjoy the freedom, but then comes the echo of your laugh no longer heard, the steady rhythm of your check-ins gone, the absence of your warmth. It forces him to decide if your energy was just convenient or truly valuable. Stopping the chase puts the relationship dynamic in balance again. When a woman is always the one reaching out, initiating, following up, she's carrying more than her share of the connection. And over time, that breeds resentment. Pulling back resets that imbalance. It gives him the opportunity to lean in or walk away. This is not about pretending, it's about protecting your energy. You're not withholding love, you're redirecting it inward. You're showing that your self-worth isn't dependent on someone else's attention. It's not just attractive, it's magnetic. Silence challenges a man to access parts of himself he may not be used to exploring. If he truly values you, he will feel that silence as a call, not to panic, but to step up. It's an invitation for him to lead, to initiate, to grow. The key is emotional detachment, not from the person, but from the outcome. You're not going silent to see what he'll do. You're choosing peace regardless of what he does. That kind of strength is rare, and it's unforgettable. Letting go of the need to always be available doesn't make you cold, it makes you centered. It tells the world, you don't chase, you attract. You don't beg, you belong. A man might react with confusion. He might feel frustrated, maybe even angry. That's natural, because he's used to you being the emotional glue, the consistent voice, the steady light. When that light dims, it forces him to find his own. Some will rise to the occasion. They'll realize what they had and step into the space you created with clarity and intention. Others will drift further away, and that too is a gift, because it reveals who was never truly aligned with your worth. Silence doesn't break connections that are meant to last. It only dissolves illusions. When you stop texting and calling, you're not closing a door, you're opening one. One that leads to mutual effort, mutual respect, and real emotional maturity. Because the one who is meant for you will feel that silence not as rejection, but as a wake-up call, and he will answer it. Withdrawing your attention is one of the most powerful moves you can make in any relationship dynamic. It is not about manipulation or creating fear, it's about energy. Every relationship operates on energy. There's a giving and a receiving, a pushing and a pulling, a presence and an absence. When you consistently reach out, initiate conversations, and maintain the emotional glue, you are constantly projecting energy outward. But the moment you decide to stop, to pull your energy back, everything changes. What most people don't realize is that energy is felt more than words. A man may not be consciously aware that you've always been the one to check in, to call, to make plans, but he feels the difference when that pattern shifts. Suddenly, there's a break in the routine. Your presence is no longer a constant. That shift is deeply felt, even if he can't explain it in words. The power of pulling back lies in that gap, the space between what was and what now is. When you stop texting and calling, you're not simply withholding communication. You're redirecting energy that has been freely flowing in his direction. And in doing that, you send a subtle but undeniable message. I no longer need this to validate me. That is a statement of power. It creates a vacuum, and nature doesn't like a vacuum. It demands a response. He may try to ignore it at first. He may pretend it doesn't affect him, but deep down, it stirs something. That silence is loud. In the beginning of many connections, there's an eagerness, a mutual desire to communicate and connect. But over time, especially if one person begins to do all the work, an imbalance forms. He may grow comfortable, even complacent, knowing you'll always be the one to follow up. Your availability becomes expected, and what is expected is often undervalued. That's not because men are careless. It's because humans naturally take consistency for granted. But when that consistency is removed, the mind awakens. Suddenly, what was background noise becomes noticeable in its absence. The power of pulling back isn't in the action itself, but in what it symbolizes self-respect. It tells the other person, I don't need to chase. I don't need to prove my worth. I don't need to keep pouring into a space that doesn't pour back into me. That kind of quiet strength is transformative. It doesn't just change how he sees you, it changes how you see yourself. The beautiful thing is, pulling back doesn't require drama. It doesn't need an announcement. You don't need to send a message explaining why you're stepping back. The most powerful shifts happen in silence. When you stop texting and calling, you allow your energy to speak for you. That kind of unspoken communication reaches deeper than any words ever could. He begins to feel it in the little things, the phone that doesn't buzz, the unread messages that don't arrive, the moments when he checks his phone without knowing why. Now, it's important to understand this isn't about punishing anyone. This isn't about creating anxiety or confusion. It's about alignment. When you're constantly extending your energy and it's not reciprocated, you become misaligned with your own value. Pulling back realigns you. It brings you back to center. It helps you remember that your worth isn't based on how much someone else reaches out. It's based on how deeply you're connected to your own peace. Men may not always express their reactions to this openly. Some may retreat further, others may reach out quickly, but no matter what the surface reaction is, the internal effect is the same. The silence forces a reevaluation. It makes him consider what your energy meant to him. It challenges him to recognize the role you've played. Often a role he didn't fully appreciate until it was gone. That is the unseen impact of pulling back. It makes your value known without needing to declare it. There's a saying that if you want to know someone's true intentions, stop giving them access to you and watch what they do. That's because action reveals truth. When you stop initiating contact, you create space for truth to emerge. If he values you, that space will pull him in. He'll feel the difference and move toward you, not out of guilt, but out of realization, out of a desire to reconnect with what he now recognizes was meaningful. And if he doesn't come closer, then your silence saved you from pouring more energy into a well that wasn't meant to hold it. Pulling back teaches you to trust yourself. It reminds you that you are enough, even when you're not being pursued, even when the phone is quiet, even when you're sitting in the uncertainty of not knowing how he feels. Because your power doesn't come from his attention. It comes from your decision to honor yourself, no matter the response. You begin to realize that love isn't about chasing. It's about resonance. And true resonance doesn't require force. When two energies are aligned, connection flows naturally. When they're not, silence exposes that truth. And that's why pulling back is so powerful. It brings clarity. It removes the noise. It shines a light on what's real and what's not. So the next time you feel the urge to reach out, ask yourself, is this coming from alignment or anxiety? From self-worth or from fear of loss? And if the answer is fear, then remember the strength that lives in your stillness. Remember that pulling back is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of knowing who you are. And when you know who you are, you never have to chase. When a woman stops reaching out, stops texting, stops calling, it does something profound, not just to the man, but to the entire dynamic of the relationship. It creates a shift. It moves the emotional weight from one side to the other. This shift isn't just about communication. It's about energy and responsibility. For a long time, many women carry the emotional burden of connection. They initiate, they follow up, they plan, they check in, and in doing so, they become the force that keeps the relationship alive. But when that force is withdrawn, something powerful happens. A man is challenged to step into his masculine role. This isn't about gender roles in a traditional sense. It's about the natural rhythm of energy between two people. Masculine energy is built to lead, to pursue, to hold space with certainty. When a woman is constantly in motion, constantly taking the lead, it disrupts that rhythm. It doesn't mean the man is weak, but it means there is no space for him to activate the part of himself that takes initiative, that invests, that decides. When a woman stops calling and texting, she isn't abandoning the relationship. She's giving it room to breathe. She's no longer forcing forward motion. She's no longer doing the emotional labor for two people. And that space she creates becomes a test, not of loyalty, not of love, but of alignment. Because a man who truly values the connection will feel that space and be moved to step into it. The absence of her constant communication puts the ball in his court. It gives him the responsibility to decide how much he values what they shared. It makes him ask himself, do I miss her presence, or was I just used to her effort? These are the questions that never come. When a woman never pulls back. But when she does, he must answer them, not with words, but with actions. This is the moment when a man has the opportunity to reclaim his role as the initiator. If the connection meant something to him, that silence will push him to take ownership. He might not do it perfectly, he might hesitate, he might reach out awkwardly, but the desire to close the gap will be there. Because the moment she stops filling the space is the moment he becomes aware of just how much space she filled. Men often don't realize what they have until they are forced to operate without it. When a woman is always emotionally available, always one message away, it creates a kind of emotional safety net for the man. He doesn't have to think too hard, doesn't have to plan, doesn't have to wonder. But when that net is gone, the mental shift is unavoidable. Suddenly, he's in the driver's seat. And that either inspires him or exposes him. The key here is that the woman is not doing this to test him. She's doing it to honor herself. She's stepping back because continuing to chase someone who doesn't meet her halfway only drains her. She's pulling her energy inward, choosing herself, and allowing space for someone else to choose her too. That's not manipulation, that's maturity, that's self-awareness. A man who is connected to his own sense of masculinity will not run from this space. He may feel the silence, he may be surprised by it, but he will understand that it is an invitation, not to prove himself, but to participate, to show up, to decide whether he truly wants to be part of something meaningful. And when a man decides from that place, not out of obligation or guilt, but out of desire and clarity, the connection becomes stronger, more balanced. For the man who isn't ready, the silence will feel like pressure. He might pull away further. He might even disappear. But that too is clarity. That shows you that he was never going to take the lead. He was comfortable being pursued. He liked being chosen, but wasn't ready to choose. And that's not something you can fix by giving more of yourself. The truth is, a man's masculine role doesn't awaken when a woman gives more. It awakens when she trusts herself enough to give less, not out of punishment, but out of presence. Out of knowing that love isn't something you drag out of someone. It's something they offer freely when given space and reason. When a woman lets go of the need to constantly manage the emotional connection, she creates the conditions for a man to either rise or retreat. Both outcomes are useful. Both tell her something true, but one of them creates possibility, while the other prevents prolonged confusion. A man who wants to lead needs to feel needed, but not in the way many people think. He doesn't need to be chased. He doesn't need constant messages. He needs to feel that his presence matters, that his effort makes a difference, that the woman he's with doesn't need to manage him. She simply needs to be met by him. And that realization often comes only when she steps back. Pulling back doesn't mean you love less. It means you trust more. You trust that if the connection is real, it will stand. That if the man is right, he will show up. That if the relationship is mutual, your absence will not lead to silence, it will lead to a response. And if it doesn't, then the truth was always there, just hidden behind your consistent effort. The power of this approach is that it creates clarity without conflict. No arguments, no accusations, just space. And space has a way of teaching what presence sometimes cannot. It reveals truth. It invites action. It awakens leadership in the ones who are ready. So when you stop texting and calling, understand that you're not pushing him away. You're simply stepping aside to see if he wants to walk toward you. And if he does, it will be his choice, his energy, his movement. And that makes all the difference. There is a quiet strength in detachment, a power that reveals itself not in distance for the sake of games, but in the clarity it creates. When a woman decides to step back, not in anger, not in bitterness, but in peace, it often becomes the most defining moment in any connection. It's not a reaction rooted in insecurity, it's an action rooted in self-respect. And what follows that moment is not just a shift in the dynamic, it's a mirror held up to both individuals. Detachment does not mean a lack of care. On the contrary, it often takes great courage to care deeply but still choose to let go. It means choosing not to control the outcome. It means saying, I trust what's meant for me will stay, and I refuse to chase what needs to leave. When a woman stops texting, stops calling, stops checking in, she's not closing the door. She's simply stepping back to allow the other person to decide if they want to walk through it. This kind of detachment creates space. And in that space, things become visible that weren't visible before. You begin to see who reaches out when they're not being reminded. You begin to feel who values your presence when it's no longer guaranteed. You discover who shows up without being asked, who notices your silence, who takes initiative when it matters. The emotional labor that used to fall entirely on your shoulders begins to shift. And the response to that shift becomes revealing. Some people fear this silence because they're afraid of what it might reveal. They fear that pulling back will lead to being forgotten, being abandoned, being replaced. But the truth is, if someone forgets you when you're no longer chasing them, they were never truly holding space for you to begin with. Detachment simply brings that truth to the surface. And even though it may hurt in the short term, it liberates you from investing in an illusion. What detachment does more than anything is put you back in alignment with your worth. It reminds you that your energy is not meant to be scattered or begged for. Your attention is a gift. Your presence is powerful. Your care is valuable. And when you remove it from people who cannot recognize its weight, you give yourself the freedom to redirect it to someone who can. That's not loss, that's alignment. There's a difference between loving someone and attaching your identity to their presence. When you detach, you give yourself permission to love without losing yourself. You allow your emotions to exist without letting them dictate your peace. You stop needing to be needed, and instead you begin to embody the belief that you are complete on your own. That shift is magnetic. It changes how people experience you. It changes how you experience yourself. And often, when a woman begins to embody that energy, when she's no longer anxious, no longer waiting, no longer proving, the world around her changes. People sense the difference. The man who once took her for granted starts to wonder where her warmth went. He begins to feel the gap, not because she's punishing him, but because she's no longer pouring into something that gave her little in return. And if he truly values her, he will rise. He will show up, not just with words, but with effort, with clarity, with consistency. But if he doesn't, then her silence did what her words never could. It spoke the truth. It showed the imbalance. It revealed the absence of effort that had been hidden behind the noise of routine communication. And now, with that truth in hand, she is free, not bitter, not resentful, just free. Detachment is not disconnection. It is emotional clarity. It is the choice to no longer chase someone in hopes that they'll one day recognize your worth. It is the decision to stop watering a plant that never grew roots. And that decision creates room for something else. Something real, something mutual, something grounded in equal energy and effort. This kind of shift doesn't just change relationships. It changes your relationship with yourself. You begin to walk differently, speak differently, choose differently. You no longer settle for bare minimum because you felt what it's like to pour into someone and receive nothing back. You've tasted the exhaustion of one-sided love, and you've decided to rest, to heal, to remember who you are. And from that place of inner wholeness, you begin to attract differently too. Because you're no longer chasing closure. You're no longer looking for validation in someone else's response. You're no longer molding yourself into someone else's potential. You are simply being. And in that being, you invite others to meet you at your level or stay where they are. There's nothing passive about this. It's not about waiting. It's about allowing. It's about standing still in your truth and letting life show you who's real, who's ready, who's willing to match your energy without needing to be pulled. When you let go in this way, you stop trying to control someone else's timing. You stop hoping they'll one day wake up and realize what you are offering. Instead, you give yourself the gift of presence. You redirect all the energy you once spent managing a connection and invest it into your own peace, your own growth, your own joy. And in doing so, you become more powerful than ever. Because there is nothing more powerful than a woman who knows her worth, who knows her energy is sacred, and who is willing to walk away from anything that doesn't honor that. She doesn't need to explain herself. She doesn't need to make noise. Her silence is enough. Her absence speaks volumes. In the end, detachment isn't about getting someone to chase you. It's about remembering that you never had to chase in the first place. That what's meant for you will find you, not through control, but through clarity. And when you operate from that truth, you attract relationships that reflect it.